we should be live. It says live in the top left-hand corner of my screen. But I do always question whether or not I'm talking to myself or we're talking to nobody. So hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Contact Centre Network. And we're tackling neurodiversity and getting a better understanding of what neurodiversity in contact centres actually means. And to do that, I've enlisted the help of should have been two people on the panel, but I'll explain that shortly. But I've enlisted the help of Andrea Burke, who I'm going to let introduce herself because she'll do a better job of it than I will. And then we'll get into the thick of the conversation. So, Andrea, welcome to the Contact Centre Network. Tell those that might be tuning in and watching a little bit about yourself. So take it away.
Thanks, Gary. And just a caveat, so straight away, I'm not an expert in this, and I'm really just speaking from experience. Every day is a school day for both personally and professionally for me. So I have been working in leadership for just over 20 years now, and for almost half of that have been at Sky. So during that time, I have had the chance to lead teams, shape people strategies, and really see what it takes to create an inclusive culture from the top down and from the ground up as well. And before you mention it, Gary, a few years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. And now looking back, I've realized that I was what people called high functioning, but really I'd just been self-managing in ways that most people didn't see. So that journey's completely shaped how I lead now. And Gary, I know that we'd talked about it previously, but I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me along. I love talking about this stuff, which is why my lovely co-panelist has recommended me for this as well. And I know that it's really important to talk about it because the more we understand how different brains work, the more that we can design workplaces where people can fully show up as well. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Andrea. And we were going to have Katy Forsyth on the panel, but sadly, work life and business life have got in the way and she wasn't able to attend. But we are sending our vibes and positive thoughts to Katy. And you'll be missed on the panel, but I'm hopeful that you'll tune in and watch it a little bit later. And maybe drop a few comments on to kind of aid the algorithm and tell Andrea what an awesome job that she's done, because you have come highly recommended. And I think from our prep sessions that we've had so far, I think we're in for a really good discussion. So I can confirm that we are live because we've already had a comment in the chat from Catherine Elias, who is one of the Fab Tribe. So thanks for making me aware that we are all live, Kate. Good to have you tuning in and look forward to catching up about some of the snippets and edits that we do from this moving forwards. But if anybody is tuning in today and you have a personal story that you are open to share about your journey and your experience with neurodiversity, please do drop it into the comments, because what I want us to do here as well today is to just create a little bit of a community of people that are open to sharing and having a conversation and learning from each other about how we kind of bring this topic life to the forefront of the conversation in the contact center. And from my point of view, I think I wanted to tackle this as a topic because I've managed people in the past, and I've worked with teams, big teams before, where I've probably made judgments of people or worked with people and engaged with them in ways that actually, if I think back on it, I thought that person could have had some sort of neurodiverse traits that I've not really recognized and then not communicated with them in the best way. So I think the contact center industry, because of the community that we've got, has a wide range of personalities and a wide range of different types of experiences, emotions, and journeys we all go through. So I think sometimes we could probably be judgmental, or we can think things of people because they behave in particular ways when we don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes and what they're experiencing and what they're tackling. So I thought it would be a really good topic to have more of an open discussion about. I'm hoping that I'm not going to say something that gets me cancelled in some way and say something hugely inappropriate as we go through, but I'm sure I won't. And Andrea, I'm going to ask you to keep me on topic and on track as much as we can. And we've already got some stuff going into the chat, which I'll share a little bit later, because we have got an opportunity for a Q&A. So if anybody's got any burning questions that they want to add into this as an additional question, myself or Andrea are fully prepared to go off script somewhat slightly, maybe Andrea less so. But yeah, we're happy to take some questions, and I want to see the kind of the topic matter going between people so that they can connect the dots and help each other out. So Andrea, what I want to do first is I want to really, I think awareness and understanding is a really important part of this topic matter for me. And I don't think we necessarily understand completely. And certainly I was guilty of this until a while ago, until I started doing some more research and more work on it. But I'm keen to understand from your perspective what you think neurodiversity means in the context of the contact center, and why do you think it's important for leaders to understand it right now and maybe lead the charge on that? So what's your thoughts on that?
Um, so for me, neurodiversity just means recognizing that our brains work differently. And I know that we've talked about this, but it's a spectrum of difference that brings unique strengths to how we work and ultimately how we lead as well. So we know that everybody's brain processes information differently, it prioritizes differently, and it solves problems differently.
Yeah.
In a contact center, that variety isn't just really interesting to me, it's a real advantage, and I don't think we've really cracked that just yet. It drives focus, creativity, empathy, and adaptability, which ultimately improves both team performance and customer outcomes, which is fundamentally what we're here to do. But for me, I think understanding neurodiversity, it helps leaders to recognize that it can't just be a one size fits all. And what might look like a challenge on the surface can actually be a real hidden strength. And I know that we've also spoken that at Sky for almost 10 years, the culture there has reinforced that idea, and inclusion isn't a box to tick. It's a leadership principle now, and that's fundamentally important. Employee networks partnering with C-suites, regional people-led strategies, that's shown me that celebrating differences drive the real business impact. And in my experience, when leaders understand neurodiversity, they can create environments where people lead through their strengths. So it's not just about one size fitting all. We can unlock potential. People can show up as their full selves. And I think that's the key to it.
You know, I think you've touched on some really interesting points there, and I think leadership is a key one. And I think that the people in the contact center that have the most influence sometimes on people are the team managers and the supervisors. But we probably do the least amount of work. Maybe, I mean, I'm prepared to be challenged on that from anybody who's watching, around how we help them identify the signs of someone who might be neurodivergent or might be struggling to communicate in a specific way, or absorb information or assess problems in a particular way. And the kind of the leadership gap there for me is in that team leader pool. I think we're great sometimes at doing people initiatives, and at senior level we come out with all of these great things, but I think the gap is sometimes in the team leader pool. Would you agree with that, or do you think it's something that we need to do more, or is it something that you guys have done really well at Sky that might kind of help?
I think I don't think it's done really well in any kind of layer through any organization. And I think that, yeah, you're right. You can build really powerful strategies. You can build really great visions when it comes to things. But fundamentally, leadership needs to be individual, and that person needs to be really understandable, really understanding, really emotionally intelligent. I think you're right in the the importance of people leadership in unearthing some of these things is key. A lot of our people in contact centres won't even understand or realise that they are considered neurodivergent. I think that that's probably key to it. And if I just lead somebody because they've got a title of neurodivergent, I'm going to miss the boat on something, because I don't think it's and I've mentioned it, I don't think it's a one size fits all. I need to understand that person as an individual, not leading them because of ADHD, because what works for me won't work for you. So if we go down that that route of learning more about neurodivergent as a specific, we kind of lose the validity of leading through human.
I totally agree. And we talk a lot about understanding our people and getting to know our people as individuals, and building those relationships with people both on a personal and a business level. And often contact center people will refer to their work colleagues as family, and I think that can kind of really help create that dynamic where people feel comfortable to share. But I think you spoke a little bit there about getting to know people and getting to understand people. I think it's particularly challenging maybe when we start to consider how we recruit and hire people, and the process that we go through to recruit and hire people, and how we potentially identify neurodivergent traits in the recruitment process and in the hiring process, that might mean that we need to adapt the recruitment process. We might need to adapt the way that we communicate to those people. And it can be a little bit of a minefield. And it sometimes the recruitment is done by supervisors or team leaders or senior team members that don't necessarily maybe have all the skills. But what would you say would be some of your top tips for people that are going through the recruitment process and considering neurodiversity in their hiring practices?
So this is probably where I would defect to Katy as the expert, because I'm not necessarily an expert from a recruitment and hiring perspective, but I do know that traditional recruitment often does filter out neurodiverse talent without meaning to. So even before you get through the door, the likes of job descriptions, they're full of vague jargon. Interviews, they reward confidence over capability. We have all been bitten by that one where people walk through the
Confidence over
door.
capability. I love that.
Yeah. And that can easily exclude brilliant people. I've fallen short of that. Put me in an interview in a group where I'm speaking publicly. I'm not necessarily going to turn up as my best, but if you were to follow me around, I could show you that I could do the job. And a UK study, here we go. Katy will love this statistic. So a UK study found that 37% of neurodiverse job seekers panic in interviews. I think that that's lowball. I think it's probably higher than that.
Yeah.
26% struggle with long and complex job application forms. 24% cite vague job descriptions as a barrier. And that's before anybody even gets through the first stage. So if you were to ask what I would suggest, take things like that. There's so many things that are out there online to show organizations, show HR functions, different things that you can do to make things a little bit easier. And for me, when you create processes that see people as individuals, you find talent that others will overlook. And I know that that's something that Katy is very passionate about. There needs to be a human element to it, because a lot of AI, a lot of automated systems will filter things out that you
100%.
need the human element to be able to spot.
Yeah. And some of those stats that you were talking about there are absolutely frightening in terms of how it filters people out. And you're right in what you said earlier on today, is that you leverage the strength of somebody's individual capability, not necessarily confidence. So they might not necessarily know that they're even really capable in it, but they might lack the confidence to kind of shout up about it. But I think if we start to think about how we adapt our recruitment processes for individuals, I think it might help us identify that talent in a slightly different way. And I think if there's anybody watching that's got specific ways that they've changed their recruitment processes to be more inclusive, then please do drop it into the chat, because I think it'd be really powerful. What I do agree with you is that Katy would have absolutely loved those stats.
She would
She
have.
would have definitely been smiling and grinning at those stats. And I think that it's a really interesting thing to start to think about. If you think about the employee life cycle, we go through hiring people, we then onboard and train them. And quite often that onboarding and training is a bit of a sheep dip approach in an induction. And we just kind of dip everybody in and say, right, you are now baptized to go and sell products or service customers, but we don't always necessarily individualize the training, which might be hard to do on a group level, especially if you're recruiting in volume. And I'm keen to understand from your experience at Sky how maybe you've tackled that onboarding and training process, so that you've got some maybe practical steps or practical adjustments that people can make to support different learning styles? What's your thoughts on that?
So once someone joins, onboarding's where inclusion really becomes visible to me. So people learn in different ways. Some prefer to read, some listen, some want to watch, others need to do. So remember, neurodiversity is a broad spectrum. What works for me might not work for the next person. And that's why for me, inclusion's always about choice. So given all of those choices, I can select which one's going to work best for me. And I don't have the responsibility to represent an entire population of neurodiverse people. The key is to treat everybody individually, and the principle applies just as much to onboarding, just as much to learning as it does to leadership. So from a Sky perspective and in other organizations, I've seen incredible organizations embracing flexible learning formats, bite-sized content that allows people to learn at their own pace. Things like buddy systems, quiet spaces, and written follow-ups have made a huge difference to what I've seen in business. And it's about setting people up to succeed, not just assuming one learning style fits all. What I've found is when you make that flexibility standard practice, everybody's going to benefit, because we're here to make sure that people turn up as their best selves and they want to stick around. So why aren't we going above and beyond to understand what will work for them?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well, especially when we look at recruitment and we look at onboarding and we look at the employee journey. There is that they might not feel overly comfortable sharing right at the outset because they might fear being judged, or they might fear that actually that can be used against me, and they might use it as a tool to get me out or end me probation. How do we become more inclusive for those types of conversations to actually be really, really comfortable from the outset? As in, I'm sat in an interview, I'm open and comfortable talking about my ADHD or my autism, and actually I want you to know that because that's how I learn, and that's how I'm going to process information, and that's how I might kind of behave in this interview scenario. How far do you think we're off from that
I think we're
open
I
and
think
honest
we're
conversation?
I think we're really far off. So you will see pockets of brilliance everywhere you go. And I think that probably sits with the person in the room, essentially, and how comfortable they can make it for the candidate. I don't think that that's necessarily the responsibility of the candidate. Yeah, it would be great in a world where everybody can just turn up as themselves, which would be wonderful and lovely. And that ideally is where we want to get to. But I think that responsibility sits with the person in the room who's doing the hiring, the onboarding, the training, to help people feel that level of psychological safety. And I don't think that that's necessarily an easy thing to do when it doesn't come naturally to you. So then that probably just goes in another circle where you go, well, the recruitment of that individual is really key. So how do we find those traits in that person for that role to be able to help create that psychologically safe space for people to turn up as themselves? Because like we said earlier, not everybody understands or realizes that they are neurodivergent, and it might be that they
100%.
just that they're just either masking it, or that they just work extra hard to try and perform in a certain way or turn up in a certain way. And I think that by us identifying that they need to turn up and be able to tell us about it, we're probably missing the point.
Yeah, I think so. And Barry Cooper's made asked a really good question, which I think is relevant probably at this point in terms of what are maybe the practical actions and workplace support systems that people have seen that truly make a positive impact on neurodivergent individuals' well-being and performance. Actions that team leaders could take away and start using going forward. Thinking about your experience and the stuff that you've done in Sky, Andrea, what are some of the practical things that you helped your team and people working within your organization do that might help answer Barry's question there, do you think?
I think that that's a very, very broad question, because I think it comes down to the training and the development programs that we have for our leadership team, because I think that to have a practical action or a workplace support system, that's quite broad, because like we say, everybody's individual. So being able to
Yeah.
put a whole list of actions
I
in
think you touched
place.
on it. I think you touched on it really well earlier in terms of saying, right, I think the first practical step is training people on what neurodiversity is, and actually bringing that into your everyday conversations, so that actually we train people when we're doing it for interviews. We make sure all our facilitators or training teams are picking up on those different learning styles. And I think it goes some really practical things that you talked about in the onboarding and the training process that might kind of start helping. But I think this is probably one of the first starts, is we just start talking about it and we get people
Yeah.
comfortable having the conversation. Would you agree?
I think definitely getting people comfortable, and you referenced something earlier, like, I don't want to be cancelled for something, and I think that's a big thing, because a lot of people don't want to talk about things through fear
Yeah,
of getting something wrong, and I think that is a
yeah,
big step in flushing those things out, because if the intention
yeah,
is the right intention, what's wrong with saying, I need you to help me because I don't understand it, so how can I help you? You help me to help you. But
yeah,
I think that there's other little tweaks. So yeah, onboarding, training, all things like that. But from a leadership perspective, other than understanding that person as an individual, there's also like really practical things that we probably wouldn't think of, like creating low sensory spaces, allowing flexible seating.
yeah,
Other times it might be digital. So reducing the
yeah,
notifications. I know that sometimes if there's so many notifications when I'm trying to concentrate, that can become overwhelming.
yeah,
So I think anything that we can do to kind of understand a little bit more about what works
yeah.
for different people,
You
that
know
could
what?
give you a whole
I
load of list.
I read something somewhere that contact center agents, are managing on a day-to-day basis around 8 to 12 different systems. Um, and quite often they're doing that on one screen. So I think a top tip for anybody is understand what your screen real estate looks like, and actually arm your teams with two screens. If they need it, three screens, just to help clear some of the mist away from some of the systems that they're using. And I think that cognitive overwhelm for anyone is hard. If you are neurodivergent, it's going to make it even harder. So I think there's lots of practical stuff that you've said there that I think people can take away, that I think would be really, really useful. And that cognitive overload, I think,
Hmm.
is a really key part that we should look at.
Yeah.
Thinking about, I suppose we can't do a session without talking about AI and or technology. And we often use technology and AI as a means to help customer experience, and make things more efficient and slicker. But I'm really keen to understand from your point of view, if there's anything you've seen from a technology point of view, that can actually help anybody who's neurodivergent learn, assimilate information differently, assist them as agents, to enable them to, I suppose, thrive with others. What would you say from a technology point of view you've seen that works particularly well?
Specific technology, I'm not too sure whether I could pinpoint specific technology, but I think, like with anything, technology can be a huge enabler. And tools like speech analytics, workflow dashboards, any kind of assistive tech,
Yeah,
they can completely change how people work. But also, and I know I've just mentioned some of them, but simpler things like noise cancelling headsets. The
yeah,
noise in the contact center can be overwhelming. Adapt visual layouts, like you've just said, 3 screens instead of 1 screen, simple macro workflows, that can all help people to focus. They can manage their sensory load and they can operate at their best, but it goes down to what works for them. And at Sky or in organizations where I have seen, the focus has always been on design and technology with colleagues, and that's with a whole load of different colleagues that represent all different types of communities or all different types of people. So it means that we're giving people the autonomy to configure their own environment, make choices about how they interact with these tools. And flexibility doesn't just support performance, it
yeah,
supports well-being, it supports engagement, and ultimately a culture where everyone can thrive. in the way that that suits them best, I think is only going to be a mutually beneficial response or outcome for the business as well. So not necessarily anything specific to call out from a technology perspective,
You know
but
what,
anything that we can find.
I think what you said there about the sensory overload, I think that's something that I hear a lot with people who are neurodivergent, is that they do feel overwhelmed by some of their senses. So if you're working in a contact center and you've got dodgy headsets and you're literally hemmed in, and you've got everybody working in the office, I think that's a brilliant suggestion. Just a really simple thing that you can do that might make a lot of difference to individuals. And you know what, we do this all the time, don't we? We do the DSE, so we do the desk safety equipment or whatever the DSE stands for. But we do that from, is your monitor at the right height? Is your chair at the right height? We don't necessarily do it from a sensory perspective, saying, right, actually, is there enough space between us? Is there a headset that works? Is your actual visual real estate working for you cognitively? So I think it's all about individualizing the approach, isn't it? I think that's come through quite a lot today so far, is that we're not all kind of, not every shoe fits the same foot. So we need to kind of make sure we're individualizing that, which I think from a technology standpoint, there's loads of stuff out there that can do some really whiz bang stuff in terms of agent assistance and knowledge articles being surfaced and auto wrap and extended wrap and think all those things that can kind of reduce the load on people. But I think some of the simple stuff around the sensory stuff is really interesting to kind of think about.
Definitely.
We obviously, you touched before on performance and well-being. I think the well-being point is a really valid one, and I'd love to explore that one a little bit more. But before we do that, in thinking of kind of performance and KPIs, we've got the traditional KPIs in the contact center, like AHT, which is not an agent metric, it's a planning metric. But it feeds kind of some of the stress that sometimes we experience in the contact center. But we've also got things like adherence and conformance. And I suppose those things can be challenging to people who may be more neurodiverse. So how do you think we can reframe some of that measurement activity and some of those KPIs that might allow our more neurodiverse colleagues to be fairly assessed without somebody turning around and saying, well, they get extended this because they've got that condition, why can't I have that? So it's the age old, they take more breaks because they're a smoker, why can't I take more breaks? How do we kind of make our colleagues understand that better, and how do we define those measurement practices for colleagues that might be more neurodiverse?
I think we need to reframe what good performance really looks like. And you hit the nail on the head. AHT is not an agent metric, it is a planning metric. And traditional KPIs like AHT or rigid adherence can disadvantage all of these people that you're talking who process things differently. And for me, fairness is about measuring what truly matters to the customer. So we're moving away from resolution, empathy, quality. These are things that our customers want and need. And when we focus on outcomes that customers actually value, we also uncover alternative opportunities for efficiency. Because let's face it, AHT, handling time, adherence, they're all relating to efficiencies in the long term. An example, like a colleague who can take a call that's going to last a little bit longer on the first time, they can resolve it there and then. And a lot of the time, what I've found is neurodivergent advisors are probably more inclined to want to solve that problem there and then. So they are more than likely going to take a little bit longer on that call. But the good news is that customer won't need to contact us back again. So, how are we
Yeah.
putting the priority on customer outcomes as opposed to planning outcomes? And I think from a leadership perspective, recognizing that and not just chasing after a few seconds reduction, I think that's key to it in understanding it. And as a leader, it's my responsibility to make sure that my people feel safe and protected, but also that I'm going to hold them to account if they're not delivering on something. That something shouldn't be average handle time. That something should be fundamental customer outcomes. And I'm big enough and ugly enough to understand that you're going to take a little bit extra long on that call, but you know what? my first time resolution is literally through the roof, and I'd prefer that because that costs a lot less.
I love that. I think you talked about reframing what good looks like and actually thinking about customer outcomes over KPIs. And you know what, we're guilty of that in the contact center, aren't we? So we say we're all focused on customer outcomes, but then some of our actions and our behaviors completely contradict that. So I think when we think about people in the contact center and how they respond to customers and the service that they can deliver, if it means taking a little bit longer time to reduce the amount of repeat demand that we're getting, then that works for the planners, it works for the customer, it works for everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that
And that well-being
responsibility is
piece
with
that
the
you
leader, because they
100%,
create the
100%.
panic. So you're right. The first thing when the service levels are a little bit dicey, the first thing that comes in is how can we save X amount of seconds? What do we need to do? And that's the responsibility of the leadership team, to make sure that the person who's taken the call, they're the most important, because they're actually dealing with the customer. So we need to be able to protect them in any way that we can. So I think that it's all well and good chasing the seconds, but we need to think about that customer.
You know what? I had a conversation once with somebody about war boards, and it wasn't specifically at the time talking about neurodiversity, but it was talking about sensory perceptions and stuff. And that if you think about what sometimes we put on war boards, it starts flashing, it starts going different colors, it becomes green, amber, red, and you've got all sorts of stuff going on. And what I'm seeing organizations do now is they still have wallboards, but now they've got agent wallboards that are just flashing on the screens. And I think to a neurodivergent individual, that amount of sensory perception and all of those colors and all of that urgency and panic that's creating, that can't be good for their well-being and their mental health, can it?
So it depends. So it might be that somebody wants that. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier on. It's choice. So it's not necessarily that somebody who's neurodivergent might suffer from that and panic and be sensory loaded. Anybody could, but it could also be somebody's superpower. So when I was on the phones way back when, going back now, showing my age, I wanted to see how many calls were in the queue, because I wanted to get to as many of them as I possibly could. And I'd set myself little goals. I'd want to be able to beat me after call work time. And I'd want to be able to do that call wrapping as quickly as possible without pressing that button. I'm considered neurodivergent. So don't necessarily assume that what works for me won't work for somebody else, or vice versa. So I think it goes back to that. And same thing with technology. I think there just needs to be an element of flexibility and choice, because if I want to be able to see the wallboards, show me the wallboards, but let me be able to switch it off, because I might be having a moment where I don't want to see it because there's too much going on. But that's for neurotypical people as well as neurodivergent. I don't think it's necessarily a one size fits all.
And Chris Holt jumped on your reframing. So reframe to look at people's strengths rather than KPIs, which I think is all about individualizing that leadership and understanding your people in a particularly good way. I also want to kind of just bring in another comment that that Chris shared, which is an interesting story about his experience as somebody who is related to somebody who has been diagnosed with AUDHD. So very similar experiences. Is that actually it's not just those people that are neurodivergent, it's those that are around them that can help people in the teams understand how it is to work with, live with people who are neurodivergent and kind of share their experiences and share their stories as well. So I think it's looking at everybody in your organization and how they're touched in that particular way with that particular circumstance.
The reason why I went through the process that I went through for diagnosis was because of somebody that I worked with who said, I think that you might need to go and get tested because I believe that you have this. So the people around us, and let's face it, we spend more time in work with the people that we work with than we do at home with our loved ones. So I think that it's really important to be able to, one, understand the person next to you because you're in the trenches together, but also to understand how you can help each other, because that all comes down to communication, doesn't it? And opening up a little bit. But that starts with psychological safety. That's led through the leader, creating all of those spaces. But I love that.
And there's another really great one from Dave Granger saying, feeling so proud working in a busy control room and being autistic. And I mean,
Amazing.
I've seen what happens in those control rooms, and they are bustling. So that sensory overload in that environment can be really challenging. It's great to know that you're doing really well in that, Dave. So thank you very
What
much for
about the
sharing.
war board?
You talked
Do they
about,
have a war board?
what about the war? Do you have a war board, Dave? Let us know. And is it flashing red like the sirens, or is it nice and green? You talked about psychological safety, and you've referenced psychological safety a couple of times. So I just want to zone in on that, where it comes to leadership and culture, and think about how is it that leaders can help foster that psychological safety so that neurodiverse employees are feeling more confident disclosing their needs to their managers at any point, and having open and honest conversations. What do we need to do to create that psychological safe environment?
Relationship. And I know that we've talked about this in previous conversations, but I think generally we've come such a long way in how we talk about and celebrate differences in the workplace. A decade ago, inclusion was a HR initiative, but now it's a leadership responsibility. And of course, we still see some unhelpful noise in the wider world. And I know I said I wasn't going to mention it, but the occasional attempt to delete diversity from conversation, muddy the messages with far right rhetoric. But within organizations, I genuinely believe that we've come on leaps and bounds, and psychological safety has become a core priority, and rightly so. So it allows people to be honest about how they work best, and it's the foundation for high performing, innovative teams. But safety alone isn't enough, and I know that I'm the one that's been coining that phrase, but psychological safety isn't the only thing. It has to be paired with emotional intelligence. That goes back to the recruitment of the leader in the position in the first place. Leaders need to listen. They need to sense what's not being said, because a lot of the time, the people around me are telling me what I'm thinking before I'm saying it, because they're spotting that something's not right. And I think that really great leaders create a space for people to bring their full selves to work. That's the be all and end all. That starts with communication. That starts with building relationships. And I know that it's really easy to say you need to allow space in meetings, as an example, for everybody to have their say. But I might not necessarily have something to say in that meeting, and I'll think about it. Whereas my leader will know that and will come and follow me up later on after that meeting to say, what are you thinking now? Because I'm a reflector, so I'll think a lot about it. Don't get me wrong, there will be times when I jump straight in, a little bit disruptive in that sense, but I think it starts with building the relationship. So as a leader, you need to be able to create that space through the relationship, because you know them. And by understanding a little bit more about what makes them tick, how to get the best out of them, it's no sheep dip. Everybody's different. Everybody's individual. So what works for me might be different for you, but that's not necessarily because of the way my brain's wired. It could be because I'm a woman. It could be because of my lived experiences. It could be because I'm just having a really bad day. So I think it's just that relationship is key. So building that relationship with your team.
When I used to run an operational team before I got into the world of consulting, I used to have somebody on my team when we were in meetings, constantly interrupting, and just had to get it out, had to say it, just get it out. And I was like, I used to say to this chap, listen, it's becoming a problem, you're interrupting, so we're going to have to work on that, because you need to just maybe have a think about it, write it down on a bit of paper, and then get out. And it's only on reflecting on that is to say, actually, there might have been some neurodiverse traits there, or neurodiverse experience that he's got that I'm not recognizing, that he just needs to get it out, because it might be an ADHD situation or scenario, but it was just something that I thought, actually, on reflection, I probably should have handled that situation differently, and sat down and had a conversation and worked it through, rather than getting irritated that they were interrupting all the time. So I think you're right. It's about emotional intelligence, isn't it? And maybe I wasn't displaying particularly good emotional intelligence back then. But I think it is important to bring that to the forefront. and bring all of that training and experience to leaders and supervisors. Because what we do overnight sometimes, and Martin Teasdale talks about this, is the overnight manager. Is suddenly we drag somebody out from the contact center who's done great performance and say, right, you've done really well in that role. Now we're going to make you a manager. Doesn't necessarily make you a leader, makes you a manager. You're given some power, you're given some authority to do stuff, but it doesn't make you a leader. And we don't invest enough time and energy in the skills of those leaders to be able to recognize different conversations, to be able to recognize different personality types, to be able to recognize different learning styles. So what did you guys in Sky maybe do that could be a really good tip or an enabler for people that are thinking about how they could educate their own leaders to become more emotionally intelligent and to be more in tune with their team and their feelings?
I think it's about making that a fundamental skill that you tease out. So spotting the potential in it. So not necessarily just hiring the person who's great at the job that they'll be leading, but also being able to put people through programs of like development programs that focus on emotional intelligence, understand a little bit more about themselves. So what I've found is by going through a process of understanding more about me, that helps me be more receptive to how I understand more about other people. So that benefits my team directly, that benefits my peers, that benefits people at home as well. So what I've found is by putting people through programs that actually make them feel really uncomfortable and learn a little bit more about themselves, that helps them to recognize things in other people, or at least create space for people. And I think there's also partly when there's a certain type of person who wants to get out of bed every day and lead a group of people. Let's face it, in contact centers, we are a rare breed. There's certain type of people who will thrive in contact centers. The operation is the hustle and bustle. It's chaos. There's loads going on. There's always
We're
a
a
problem.
strange breed.
Firefighting. We are a strange breed, but we are that. We are that. So I don't necessarily think that you develop that
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. I think there's also an element where people want to be there and want to do it. So I think that that's probably part of it as well. But leadership development programs are key to that, and creating the space and capacity. Because, like I've just said, the operation is chaos. And a lot of the time, our own development we will put on the back burner, and that's not okay, because me spending time developing myself is only going to benefit the people around me. And we often see it as a martyr. We strap that cape on and we say we're going to get in the trenches and we're going to do everything that we need to do. We're not going to stop. We're all in it together. But the reality of it is, not just from a development perspective, but also with learning about like people, human differences, neurological safeties, neurodivergent, everything. If we're not learning constantly, we're already out of date, because I guarantee by the time this gets posted, there'll be something else that comes into the mix. And I think as a leadership cohort, we need to be open to the fact that if we're not constantly growing, we're already out of date. So I think creating the space and giving people the authority or the permission to learn, I think is really key for organizations, because we will often put that to the bottom of the list.
And we talked about kind of some of the environments that people work in, and I think COVID's probably got a lot of things to answer for within those that are neurodivergent, because it kind of forced people into a space where they were isolated, they were detached from their colleagues, they were kind of put into maybe a room that they stayed in for 8 hours and didn't really go for a walk and didn't really do much. So the environments that we're working in now, in terms of either hybrid, remote, or bricks and mortar, how much do you think that has an influence on how we manage and lead neurodiverse teams, and what are some of the ways that you've seen work quite well in connecting people virtually, and helping those that are neurodiverse in the different kind of working environments that they're in?
So I think from a COVID perspective, you're right. We have completely shifted the way that we lead. We've completely shifted the way that we work. And I think that it's really important to recognize the fact that pre-COVID, we took a lot of these signals for granted because we would be in the office together all of the time. So we would know the ins and outs of how people operated, how they worked, when they were having a good day, when they were having a bad day, because you could physically see them. You were sat across the desk from them. Whereas now, as leaders, we have to work a whole lot harder to be able to connect constantly with people virtually. So that could be just having a reminder to just go and check in on all of your people in your team every day, no matter what, just to make sure that they're okay. Look them in the eye. I think what I didn't really realize pre-COVID was how important video calls were. So
Yeah.
how many times did you dial into conference calls and you could just see blank with
A
little
blank screen with
pictures?
an initial.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas now I think it's really important to be able to see the whites of people's eyes so that you can
Yeah.
really understand how they are feeling. Because if you've built that relationship with them pre-COVID or during COVID because you've been able to get time together or spend time doing Friday night quizzes or whatever you do,
Yeah.
all of those good things. Now that we're coming out of that towards more like hybrid model, I think some organizations are choosing to become more on site, 100% on site.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
There's been so many studies that show that people need that connection, but do they need it 100% of the time? Not necessarily. We'll probably see people with neurodiverse needs that have probably thrived during COVID because they've had their safe space. They've been able to just spend time in isolation, essentially, but there is still a need for that human connection. So I think more than anything, it's mental health that's
Yeah.
taken a little bit of a dip as opposed to neurodivergent needs, because I think
Yeah.
everybody has been in a similar situation. And I know Katy would have probably loved talking about generations at
Mm,
this point, because we've got a whole generation of people right now who have been brought up in
yeah.
lockdown. So that probably makes me a little bit nervous as to the future of the workforce in the contact centres and what we need to do now to be able to ready ourselves
Yeah.
for that future. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I think there's a lot of things, but practically just making sure that you spend time with the team virtually as much as you can, be all together on site
Yeah.
as much as you possibly can so that you can
Mm,
build that relationship, because that relationship isn't just with me and the people within my team.
yeah.
It's as much of an importance for the team to connect
Yeah.
as well. So how can we spend more time together as a team, whether that's virtually or in person?
Yeah.
I think is
I,
key.
I completely agree, and I think the generational thing is a really interesting one, and the generation that's grown up through COVID, I I I do wonder if there has been more awareness of neurodiversity and those that are coming forward with um, neurodivergent needs because of COVID and because of the impacts that did, and it kind of made me think, and from your own experience, Andrea, is like there we typically or we more often see neurodiversity in the age groups of 18 to 24. I think there's lots of research that says actually that's a bigger population that has been identified as having greater neurodiverse needs. But actually, you're an example personally there where you've identified later in life that you're ADHD. And I'm wondering, for those that might be working in the contact center, they might be in their early 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're just thinking that that's just how they are. What would you say to those that maybe, I suppose, maybe a little bit older and maybe are feeling, well, I don't want to be diagnosed with something, or I don't want to put a label on it, or I don't want to kind of be seen as being different. What would you say to those people that might be a bit nervous about going to the doctor, getting a diagnosis, and helping them kind of navigate that kind of new way of life, I suppose, or that new way of working?
I think it comes down to ultimately individual preference. So if you feel that it's having an impact on the way that you live, then I urge people to go and start that process. It's a very, very, very lengthy process. So that's just one thing to point out. But if it's having a detrimental impact and you think that something's going to help, I urge people to go and do it, because I've known people who've been given medication that helps focus on certain things. I've seen people who are able to articulate what works really effectively for them, having understood a little bit more about their diagnosis. If it's having an impact on your way of living, absolutely go and do it. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. And we talked earlier about how I think we're more understanding and more in the position to celebrate difference now. I think now's the time. Why not? And yet you're right, that population of people, those ages are probably right, but that's because they've been brought up in a period of time where we've probably been more open, more receptive to difference, and wanting to understand people's differences, as opposed to, well, I don't think like everybody else in that room, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut, or I'm going to pretend that I agree with everything that everybody's saying because I don't want to come across as disruptive, or I don't want to interrupt, and I'm not going to remember what you've just said or what I need to make a note of. Whereas now, I think now's the time. So strike while the iron's hot. I think we need to be making sure that if it's having a detrimental impact on you, if you're just really curious about it, because that's I didn't go for the diagnosis because I was having any kind of struggles, but the signs were there. Now when I look back, as a child and growing up, the signs were there. There's very many story I could probably go through. And me and my family like laugh about it now, where we talk about like when I was a child and I used to stand at the kitchen door. I wouldn't be able to go through the door, and I'd speak to people through the door because I'd stand at the barrier. Really, really odd things. But growing up, that was just normal to me. That was just normal to me mum. That was normal to me dad. And that's because I was the brightest kid in the class. I'd always pass all of the tests. I would be up all night the night before crying and upset that I would get a question wrong on me 8 times tables. But we overlook that. That's normal in childhood, apparently. But I think that if it's having a detrimental impact on your way of life, or on how you work, or if you're really curious, I definitely urge people to do it, because it opened up my eyes and I'm able to articulate why in a lot of cases sometimes now. And it also helps me to understand a little bit more about the quirks that I have that are as a result of that, versus the quirks just because of my upbringing.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I appreciate you being so open and candid about your experiences, because I think that will resonate with people and it'll start to get them thinking. And I think organizationally, there's probably a lot to be done to recognize the needs of I mean, I think there's a lot to be done to recognize the needs of people in general, but especially coming out of COVID, people's needs, their environments, their routines, their habits, and everything has changed. But especially if you are neurodiverse, there's a different way of thinking and programming your brain, I suppose. But I think organizationally, what would you say are some of the, I hate to use the word policies because it makes it a kind of a tick box thing when you've got a policy, but what are the things that contact center folk and or other businesses need to be thinking about when they're designing and implementing policies and compliance and programs that help support neurodiverse colleagues?
I think so. That's a very, very big question, and what we say today will be out of date by tomorrow.
We've got
I
7 minutes.
wholeheartedly stand by that. But I think neurodiversity, and you kind of touched on it, it shouldn't be siloed. So for me, it's part of leadership development, it's part of recruitment design and people strategy. There should always be a real partnership between employee networks, HR leaders, which ensures that all policies become practical support, not paperwork. I think that's the key to it. I think a lot of these processes are just that. They're just a process that people feel comfortable that they've written them down, and that if you need to, you can go and dig them out. I think what's really important is that we lead from the front, and that those policies are defined and shaped as we evolve, because we are going to learn a whole load of new things as we go. And I think if from a compliance perspective, as an example, that should just be a baseline. Everything else should help to enable it. So if neurodiversity isn't siloed, then it's woven through all of our policies and our processes with people at the heart of everything that we do. And inclusion generally only works when it's embedded into how decisions are made and not added on as a nice to have. I think that's probably where I come from.
I think that's a really brilliant answer, and it kind of underpins employee. If you consider yourself to be an employee-centric company, you're thinking of the needs of everyone, not just the needs of individual groups. So you've got to kind of think about what's best for all of your people, all of your leaders, that best supports them in any of their endeavors and any ability to grow. I think there's nervousness sometimes from leadership, and we touched on this yesterday when we were chatting with Katy, around leaders feeling that they might be discriminating against one group or the other because they're allowing workplace adjustments for a particular group, but they're not a neurotypical person. So what's some of your advice for leaders when they're approaching some of those more trickier conversations around performance management and HRE type conversations with people who are neurodiverse, so they don't land themselves in any hot water?
I think it's that. So if you've built relationships with these individuals and the right intention is there, ask. So I think as a leader, it's my responsibility to be there to understand how I can get the best out of my people. So if I'm creating that really safe space, I've got the support from our HR because we've done all of we need to do from a policy and a process perspective. So as an organization, we have got all of those things in place. I think as an individual, I need to understand how to get the best out of those people, and they're the best people to be able to help me with it. And that's not just neurodivergent, that's anybody. So that goes through the whole layers of the organization. We need to understand people a little bit more, and nobody gets out of bed with the wrong intention. I think it's just about us making sure that we're looking at, instead of us just accommodating things like neurodiversity, we need to celebrate it, because neurodiversity comes with a whole load of superpowers that we just don't tap into. And where we see one thing might be a challenge, it might be a huge strength in problem solving, critical thinking. We don't necessarily place a lot of emphasis on the superpower side of it. We're always looking for, well, how do we make sure that we are accommodating that? What are we doing to celebrate parts that don't necessarily show up every day? I think that's important.
And my final question then, just thinking future forwards, what do you think contact center life will look like in a year or so's time, where we've learned to celebrate people's individual strengths and we've got a really proper grip of what a good inclusive strategy looks like for organizations? What does that contact center future look like, do you think?
So the next 12 months is very ambitious. So I don't know about the next 12 months, but for me, like the future, I think it's all around not fitting people into systems, but building systems that fit people. I think that's probably where the best kind of future of contact centers would be, because we're very good at building these systems. Now we're trying to adapt.
We're good at systems and processes.
Now we're trying to adapt it around different people's needs and different people's requirements. Whereas if we were to build the systems that fit the people, I think that probably saves us a whole load of work.
Brilliant. Well, I could have chatted for another hour or so, Andrea, but we have pretty much reached the top of the hour for this conversation. Hopefully, the listeners and anybody that's tuned in have taken some really good practical sound bites from this. I've certainly taken a lot from it, and I think there's some real great nuggets and one-liners that I can pull out to do some edits that I know Kate Elias, who I mentioned before, will have kind of written down and said, oh, that'd make a good little short. But I think you've got some really great advice, and I think your lived experience of it has really helped bring this whole conversation to life. So thank you so much for sharing and for bringing the awareness. And thanks to everybody who has contributed in the comments and the chat. There's been some really great stuff shared in there. So final thing for me to say is thank you, Andrea. We will be back next month where we'll be talking about what does 2026 look like from a customer experience point of view, and what are some of the priorities that we need to focus on 2026 to get customer experience spot on. But thank you very much for the conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure Katy will enjoy watching it when she gets back as well, and she'll watch it in the replay. I'm just going to ask you to stay on for 30 seconds more and I'll end the stream here. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and see you again for our final one before Christmas in November. Take care, folks.
Thank you.